Okay, guys, so today's video, we're going to talk about the difference between training as a natural lifter and training as an enhanced lifter. Now, I've seen a few videos, there's a few videos out there on this very subject. Most notably, Mike Israetel made a video a few years ago about this. But his video is more along the lines of physique and bodybuilding based. And really, when I watched the video, because I want to see if I agreed with a lot of it or not, I agreed with it, but there aren't that many noticeable differences or notable differences between training as an enhanced lifter and training as a natural lifter. Now, like if you look at the studies, like Greg Knuckles has an article which I'll link where he dissected all the studies done on optimal training frequency, for instance, for strength. So this article was only in regards to strength. That's obviously what we're going to lean towards more with this channel because that's, what most of you are interested in, a little more than physique. But he also had an article about, optimal training frequency for physique purposes. And what the article found, that all the studies, basically the conclusion was that higher frequency for upper body pressing movements, specifically bench, was more optimal, whereas it was less of a thing for the lower body lifts like squat and deadlift. So that echoes 100% my own anecdotal findings as far as what I've experienced throughout my training history. Been training for, I think, what is it now? 17 years. So 17 years of training. And what I've found is a higher frequency is the optimal way to go for bench. So anywhere in that 3 to 4 day range seems to be where most of your benefit's going to come from. Now, that being said, I have had guys who have been successful with 2 days when we throw in a lot of accessories and that sort of thing afterward. But based on the articles, which I will link, the article, the studies, 3 to 4 days of bench is going to be the way to go, whether you're on anabolic steroids or not. So most of you guys who watch this channel, I think it was about 85% are natural lifters. So that's where that higher frequency tends to be the way to go, which is what I tend to gravitate towards with my own training and with my clients. I'm typically a fan of 3 days a week, but occasionally we'll go to 4. And in some instances, go to 2. It just depends. But 3 to 4 seems to be the optimal margin, whether enhanced or not. So I don't think the frequency changes at all. The biggest limiting thing you're going to run into as an enhanced lifter on anabolic steroids is that you will have typically more injuries come up, more systemic inflammation. So I remember, all my years of training when I was on anabolics, and there was a lot more aches and pains, just chronic inflammation, systemic inflammation throughout my body, which can be attributed to a greater amount of C-reactive protein in the blood, which is released as a response to inflammation. So this is typically, there's even a study out there I can link as well where C-reactive protein was much higher in anabolic steroid users, which goes to show there. And it was a small study. I think there were only 10 people in the anabolic steroid group, 10 people in the training group without steroids, and then 10 in the sedentary, or 8 in the sedentary group. So 28 people total. But the 10 who are on anabolic steroids had a much higher C-reactive protein, which is one of the main biomarkers on blood work for inflammation. So this higher level of what I'm getting at is this higher level of systemic inflammation led to, it leads to more aches and pains, which affects how often you can train. So in some instances, enhanced lifters just can't train with as much volume or frequency because there's more going on. There's more inflammation, more injuries. You need longer rest periods as far as that goes. Whereas, even being drug-free now, I don't notice as many aches or pains. It's just not the case because my body's more in line with what it can keep up with. The progress isn't so substantial that it's more than my body can tolerate. So I'd say that's one of the biggest differences. With steroids, you're going to have more overall inflammation in your joints, your muscles. They're going to take a little longer, not necessarily to recover, but it's just, there's more to work around, I should say. There's a lot more to work around as far as that's concerned than as a natural lifter. Also, the load of which you're handling, the intensity ranges are higher. You're ramping up your intensity ranges at a much higher degree than you would be naturally. You're progressing faster, more or less. So in that regard, the joints have a harder time keeping up with it, which is kind of what, Mike Israetel said, where the connective tissue needs longer to recover as an enhanced lifter. So this is where, people cycle off the steroids. They take breaks where they go down to a cruise dose or whatever. It's to somewhat take a step backwards so you can take 2 steps forward later on. It's to rest everything up, rest up the connective tissue, the muscles, all that sort of thing. So I would say one of the biggest differences, the overall inflammation and the connective tissue, how it can keep up with everything, is a lower rate, compared to natural users. So in some regards, a natural lifter could probably get away with more training volume and more frequency than an enhanced lifter, which is ironic because you think, everybody just thinks you're on anabolic steroids, so you can train more often, you can do it, you can train all the time, you can recover better, which maybe from a muscular standpoint is true that you can train more often and you can recover faster. But as far as the connective tissue and the overall degree of inflammation in the body, you can't recover as well because you're stressing the body to a much greater degree. There's a lot more stress on the overall system. So think of it like a car. We're putting a lot more stress. There's a lot more things going wrong with us, with the car, basically. So the car may not perform as optimally. Whereas, if everything's going right with it, it's going to go for a while. Maybe that's not a perfect analogy, but that's kind of the way I would put it. It's just the overall, degree of stress on the body is much greater on anabolic steroids, which is why natural lifters might be able to train more. But as far as the ideal frequency of lifts, going back to that, 3 to 4 days for bench, that's going to stay the same regardless of what you're taking. And then for squat and deadlift, this is more, Greg Nuckols with the study shows that higher frequency doesn't necessarily equate to more strength gains for squat and deadlift. Overall, the point of the article was higher frequency tends to be a little better, but it's much less of a degree for squat and deadlift. You can read it yourself. So for me, what I've found in my training and with my clients, 2 squat days a week tends to be ideal. If I had to put it, the majority of people, what do they get the best results on? I would say 2 squat days a week, whereas deadlift, I would even put it at 1. So I would like to do a 2 squat, 1 deadlift day a week frequency. Deadlift, I think it's the most taxing lift. I believe I'd have to look into this. I believe it has kind of been proven that it's the most taxing lift, hardest to recover from. So 1 day a week of heavy deadlifts tends to do the trick, and then 2 days of squat. So those things really wouldn't change, even if I got on some crazy test trend cycle where I'm taking everything under the sun. I would keep all the training, relatively the same. So it's just this big myth slash misconception that your training has to differ immensely, due to what you're putting into your body. But I've kind of found that, it's the same pretty much. It's going to be ideal, no matter what, as far as the training frequencies, as far as how you set up that training. There's not a huge differentiation there. The only thing that changes this is the limiting factor of inflammation and injuries, which are much more common in geared lifters. It's like, why do you guys see guys squatting 700-800 pounds on steroids tearing muscles? Why do you see them tearing their quad tendons or blow out their ACLs or having, dramatic pec tears and things like that? But you don't see the tested lifters having these issues. You don't see tested lifters blowing out tendons and stuff. The stress is overall much higher with the anabolic steroid users. The injuries are higher. The injury rate is much higher. That's why we don't have this problem in natural lifters, why natural lifters can presumably train more in some instances. And I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been on the drug-free side of the coin. I've been on the for about half my training life. And the other half of my training life, I've been on the enhanced anabolic steroid using side. So I know how this stuff lingers, how you have to deal with it. You'll lose a large period of time with a certain injury because it's not going away. And this stuff can even happen without anabolic steroids. It's just more prevalent. But it's kind of you guys might be disappointed with the conclusion of the video because there's just not a huge difference at the end of the day. When I really try to objectively think about everything I can possibly look at, there's just not a tremendous difference in how I would structure training for an enhanced versus natural guy. It comes down to individual history as far as injuries and working around those. That's often what's going to dictate how high we can go with the frequency, because you also got to look at frequency plays a role in maximum recoverable volume. So if the MRV, maximum recoverable volume, is higher for one individual, we can do more frequency, we can do more volume. But for others who have an injury history with certain things, where let's say they have chronic patellotendinitis in the knee, they might not be able to train as often. They might have to only squat once a week. Or someone like myself with a major hip issue. For me, squatting once a week might be the more optimal approach as opposed to two. Whereas somebody with no injury history who, we've proven they can handle that higher frequency, higher volume over a period of time, can get away with 3 days of squats per week, with a deload every fourth or fifth week in there. So it really depends more on injury history and overall inflammation than whether or not you're enhanced or natural. So that's the conclusion for the video. If you guys liked it, give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Thank you for supporting the channel.